I have three dogs and fish tanks. So I kind of live in a mini zoo here. So
You got a pet heavy existence, huh?
yeah,
What about you, Vibor? Do you have any pets?
No, no, I've never had any pet. Maybe I'll think of having one soon in London. So yeah, but no, not till now.
So fresh tanks or salt tanks?
oh, freshwater. I'm not. I don't have that patience to do saltwater. That's too much work. I'm at the point where I'm ready to be done with the freshwater tanks as well. It seems like it's a easy hobby, and then after you get into a while, you're like, this is not. It becomes rather expensive at times. So
It's easy to do poorly. I've done it before many times poorly. Then I
yeah,
get to a point where I just don't want to put any more effort into it. I'm done with fish for it now.
yeah. We used to have a cichlid tank, and we stopped doing that just because they would just go after each other and kill each other for no reason. One day they're perfectly content, and the next day you only have one left in the tank, and you're like, okay, I guess that's not a deal. But now we just have
Right.
goldfish in one of our bigger tanks. So
Yeah. Easy to care for. Well, we've got some attendees coming in. We'll give it another half a minute or so, and then we'll get started here. Before we were starting, before we went live, found that, let's see, Jake is outside of Milwaukee, right? Are you in the city of Milwaukee?
I'm in the Milwaukee County. I'm in a so kind of a suburb of Milwaukee.
Okay. Vibor is in London, which doesn't really localize you. Whereabouts in London are you, Vibor?
So basically, I came to London for like during the Corona only. Like I joined in London 6 months ago in March when Corona was in peak. So it has been quite a hard time moving from. I actually moved from New Delhi to London.
Oh
So it has
man.
been very hard in the in this times because could not go out, could not I was so scared when I moved, but now
Uh-huh.
things are stable and I'm pretty much now enjoying started to enjoy here. So yeah, so looking forward. So it's just a starting of my new phase, you can say. I was previously in New Delhi, India.
Great, great. Well, I think we can get started. And what we're going to start with is introductions, and we'll start with Vibor. Tell us who you are and a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I started my Salesforce journey back in 2011, straight out of my graduation from college. So I started working on Salesforce, different type of projects. So during my last 8 years or 9 years in Salesforce, I have worked with different companies and different type of clients, and even different geographies. So I would say I had a good experience till now working on different type of functionalities, modules within Salesforce with different type of businesses. And I am like 5 times certified, and I have been working on development side. Initially started as a hardcore developer, and then gradually I moved into a Salesforce consultant, and I'm looking forward to becoming a Salesforce architect soon. So I'm moving into that direction. And yeah, and recently I started writing some stuff on Salesforce on my blog, accidental coder. So that is something new that I started recently, and I've been writing much about flows. So I'm quite a kind of a flow fan, you can say. So I love writing flows nowadays, and saying goodbye to all those Apex classes and all wherever I can.
Yeah,
So
yeah. Actually, I've checked out Vibor's blog, and it's definitely worth a look. Um, that's great. Accidental coder, accidental sales. It's accidental.
accidental
Yep.
coder, yeah, and the URL is accidentalcodersf.com.
Right. Accidentalcodersf.com.
Yeah.
Thank you. Jake, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got in Salesforce and all that.
sure. I started a little bit later. I started in about 2013 when I was introduced to Salesforce. I started off as an internal admin type of deal. Eventually joined the consulting world where I started picking up certifications, and now I run a Salesforce developer user group here in Milwaukee. I also run a Salesforce set editor group in Milwaukee as well. Um, I forget how many certifications I have. I think it's 15. But then uh, this year I was actually introduced, or not introduced, I was inducted into the Salesforce MVP program. So I was nominated for that and got into that. So this is my first year as MVP. So kind of cool to be on that boat too now.
Great, great. All right, so it's our topic today is flows, and there's some new developments in flows that have come out and are coming out in winter. We'll start with Vibor. Tell us a little bit about what you know about what's changing with flows, what's new and different and good.
Sure. So yeah, so Winter 21 release was a very big release in terms of flows enhancements. So in the previous release, we were introduced to before save flows and after save flows, and this release actually completed the cycle. Now we have before delete flows. So this is a new feature that was brought in this release. So before delete flows can be triggered. It's a type of record triggered flows, and they can be triggered anytime we try to delete a record for any object. So we can define on which object they will run, and based on that object, we can define when they should, like whenever a delete thing is happening on any record, they can be triggered automatically. So that's a great enhancement. Another great feature that I personally like is the introduction of or conditions or condition logic within our queries. So basically, previously, whenever we had to write any record level filters or to fetch record or to delete or insert or something within our flows in any of the elements, we could only do and condition. So basically, it was all and. But now we can do an or condition. We can define a custom logic also as a mix of and or, as we do in our other processes like process builders or even in validations or wherever we do. So that's a great addition to the flows capability this winter release. And moving forward, there's one more feature. Now we can also define when our record triggers flows will fire. Previously, they fired on all the records, so which was not very optimized way of firing the flows, because they would fire on every record of that object we define the work that flow on. But now we can give a conditional logic or a basically a filter criteria to decide on which type or which records particularly the flow should fire. For example, if I want to have a flow on a update of a case, so I can define only if a particular criteria is met, then the flow will fire, not on all the records. So which is a great addition, saves a lot of processing time for unnecessary records, and brings more optimization into the picture. Also, as like as the people who have worked on process builders, there was a feature like we can fire the process builders only if a particular change was made to the record. So this thing was not there in the flows previously in the record triggers flows. Now we can also fire the record trigger flow whenever a particular thing is only changed, like only if a particular change is made to the record, then only we can decide to fire the flow, not otherwise. So that's also a very great addition. Moving forward, we were also introduced to auto layout. So that is a cool feature. Like on the canvas, you can have just on the click of a single, you can say toggle button on the top of the flow builder, you can you can see all of your existing flows in a very cool layout, and it's kind of a pictorial representation of a flow, how the things are connected, and you can see easily which element is belonging to which loop, and which how they're connected to each other. And during starting, like when we start or write a new flow, we can also decide to write using auto layout. So that's also very good and a cool enhancement to the flow builder, and it makes our life easy to build new flows. And on top of that, other good feature that I found in the winter 21 release is user debug mode. So now we can debug the flow by running the flow as a particular user. So it is very helpful in scenarios where you want to, where different users have different permissions, or record permission, record level or field level, and you want to test how a flow behaves for different set of profiles or users. So from the flow builder only, we can use the debug option to debug the flow as a particular user, to decide and see how the flow is behaving for different set of users. And I think these were the most, I would say, most important features that I could recall, and I believe are most important in the winter 21 release. Uh, and we also have a pilot program where which is not yet launched, but we can, like, it is launched, but you have to register with your account manager to get into that pilot program, where now on the screen flows we can have multiple column layout. Currently the screen flows have only single column, but there's a pilot program where you can have multiple columns within a screen, and you can design your screens in a much better way. And it is almost like designing a lightning web component or a aura, where you can have multiple layouts and multiple levels of columns. So that is also something that is in pilot and will be coming soon, but it was introduced during this release only, so I just wanted to mention that part also. So yeah, I think, yeah, these are some of the very new features that we have. Maybe, yeah.
Good, good. Thank you for that exhaustive rundown. It sounds like Salesforce is putting a lot of effort into flows. Jake, you've done some presentations and have done some thinking about Process Builder. Is it time to just implement everything in flows, or what are some of the blockers that keep people on Process Builder?
I mean, first of all, I think there's going to always be a use case for process builder, and there's always be use cases for flow. So when it comes to process builders, a lot of your more simple transactional types of actions, I would keep those in process builders. Anytime you need to have that conditional if then or logic taking place, keep that in process builders. It just keeps it simple. Also, don't go too crazy with your process builders. We don't want to have you don't want to have 20 process builders in a single object. Let's keep that to the creations and edits and updates. But when it comes to flow is very vast, and to be honest, I'd see it replacing some process builders. I also see it replacing triggers as well. Where before you needed to have developers maintain code, you can now transfer some of that over to flow and have point and click admins take care of those types of requests now, with especially the new updates coming here in winter. I personally am a big fan of the screen flows. It's a cool way to interface with the process that you're trying to run. A lot of things we were talking about are there automatic flows happening behind the scenes, but Flow has a great interface. It's not the flashiest, but you can do some pretty cool things with it. You can incorporate other parts like Apex and Lightning components in there as well if you want to really get fancy. I use screen flows all the time, and I like to put just simple text fields in there with rich text fields with images in there, and you'd be surprised with just a little bit of image there can make your screen flow pop just that much more, and it's just a little bit of flair, and it really can get the job done. But yeah, I think process builders and flows, just like workflow rules, they all have their place in the Salesforce ecosystem. If you're going to be designing things, take into account of what you're actually doing. If you need to do a lot of queries and things like that, definitely go into Flow. If you need to go find existing records, I'm going to say go into Flow. It's going to be easier to handle them versus trying to do those types of things in Process Builder. You can do them, but it's going to be easier done in Flow.
Viper, do you have anything to add to that? Sound reasonable to you?
Yeah, so I think, yeah, it's all same, but I would like to add like one point, like where I found flows are still not there yet, like which some of the points where flows can improve in future enhancement is like uh, sometimes we need to know the old values of the record. Like in triggers, we know the old value, and sometimes we need to populate some fields after an update or before making an update on a record. We need to know the older value. So still in flows, we are not able to get some old values when they are triggered. So we only have the latest values, especially in after update flows, because in the before update flow, we still have a workaround where we can use a get element to find the older value, but does not work in after update flow. So similarly in the delete flows or any of the flows, we don't have the option to also check whether a particular field was changed, especially for the update flows. We do not know if a particular field was changed, which we can do in process builder. Like we can use is change attribute or a is new attribute. So we do not know in a flow whether a record is new or changed when we use a flow type where we have before update or insert. So we do not have any way to understand whether a particular field was changed or record was created or updated. So these are some of the very big limitations I see where I had to write a process builder in combination with a flow or maybe a trigger. So in these, some of the things that I remember right now. Yeah.
Yes, those are good points.
Yeah.
So Jake, let's talk about flows and performance. Flows versus process builders versus other, Apex triggers or whatever. Do you get is there a performance penalty for using the flow? Is because it's got all
Um,
that functionality?
Not that I've seen. As long as you develop it correctly, you shouldn't have any performance. If you're doing like single record updates within a loop, you're probably going to have performance issues. And luckily, with the new Winter 20 release now, if you actually do your debug testing beforehand, you can actually find if you're going to hit some of those limits beforehand with the limit counter. But
Mhm.
yeah, flows can be able to handle a lot of those mass updates a lot faster than the process builder did, because a lot of the process builders they were single transaction, they're running that one process, that one iteration through there, whereas flows can handle a little bit more updates. So I think flows are a better option if you're doing a lot of data, mass data entry, especially if you're doing auto triggering. Whereas if you're doing single one off transactions, they can both handle the request, but I think flows can be the better candidate for that.
Mhm. Viper, you have some thoughts on performance and flows?
Yeah, so yeah, just to add on to that, so as Jake mentioned, as long as we design the flow by taking care of all those best practices that Salesforce has given us, especially it's just like writing a code. So we should always make sure we do not put like any DML element within a loop, do not query within a loop, do not insert or delete anything in a loop. And
Mhm.
also we should make sure that we combine all our similar records in a single collection variable instead of putting different DML for different records. So combine everything in one place and do a single DML operation instead of doing one by one. So as long as we follow these best practices, the only limitation that I feel that sometimes becomes a issue is the 2000 element per transaction limit, where in a flow, like in a transaction, you can only have 2000 elements. So sometimes when we have a bigger bulk size, a bigger batch size of any mass data upload or something, that might happen, but we can always reduce by reducing the batch size and keep the batch size within the limit so that the flows limit is not hit. Apart from that, yeah, it's all quite, I believe personally, I've seen like before update flows are better than even process builders because they fire at the first in the transaction cycle. They're the first thing that get fired. So even before the validation rules, so they're quite fast. And if you have to make any single update on the record which triggered the flow, they're very fast and very, you can say, robust. I would say, yeah, they're very good to write actually. Yeah.
I was uh, I was looking at we had a pre-meeting before we had this presentation. I think one of the limitations that one of you guys mentioned was limitations on outbound messaging with flows or triggering out like
I mean,
emails and such.
yeah, I mean that's a limitation on process builder as well. The only true automation tool that we have is workflow rules that does that. I mean, we can do all those types of things, but we're gonna have to write Apex to do those types of actions and then have our process builder or flow call those types of things. But yeah, I think having a integration aspect of it that's not code would be a really a native internet and no integration tool would be cool for flows as well. Like if you want to make a call out or post something out there versus having to go use the process, the workflow rules that are out there.
Mhm.
Yeah.
There
You
might be
can call an external Apex class from a flow though, right? That
yeah,
sends a
yeah,
message.
yeah. You can do it other ways, but I think it'd be cool if you because you can do it natively with point and click tools with workflow rules, but you can't do that with process builder or flows. You have to actually build that Apex class to do that
Yeah.
if you want to contain all in that one system.
Mm-hmm.
That's really,
Go ahead. Sorry, Jake.
I was saying, I think that's really the only real limitation. And it's not really a limitation. I just wish there was more citizen development towards tool for that. So somebody can actually, that doesn't have a programming background that could help with those types of integrations instead of relying on a developer for that type of thing.
Right. Right. Um, Viber, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, like uh, there are some limitations always with the flows, but now if you are following flows and different channels that posting about flows, so one of the best channels is like unofficialsf.com. So they give us all these ready-made plugins. So for different type of you can say functionality which are not there in the flow yet, they, and for the people who cannot develop or custom develop themselves, there are a lot of now ready-made, these components and ready-made plugins you can just install in the org and play around and use them directly with minimal customization or configuration. For example, they put some many screen components. Like I saw a component where you can have a data table or a list within your screen flow just by using that component and just configure that. Likewise, we have a limitation that we cannot do a kind of a map that we do in a Apex class. Like we cannot create a map key value pair. So for that we have a component. So likewise, there are many components which are ready-made now. If you're willing to search, we can find many ready-made tools and just install and plug and play within our flows. So some of these limitations can be, still we can still remove them. But yeah, some of the things like Jake mentioned, we have to always write a custom code for now. For example, outbound messages and any other feature which is not right out of the box, but we can always achieve it through maybe writing an Aura component or a LWC and Apex class. Yeah.
And I just wanted to say to the audience that if anybody have any questions, throw them in the Q&A. If you have any, we have two flow guys here, so if you have a flow question, throw it in there. Sorry, go ahead. So the components on unofficialsf.com, are there messaging components on there? Do you know?
I've never used the messaging one myself, but it would be good to check it out. But I'd never had a requirement where I had to use Flow for sending any outbound message or integration, basically. Uh,
Mhm.
but I think there must be something which is close to that, or maybe the same one. But I think it is just an Apex class which has to be used from a Flow. And if it's not there, maybe someone can develop it after this, so we can put it there. So yeah, it's a good idea actually.
Yeah, I've used a couple of their components. Actually, the screen one for the list view is a really helpful one.
Yeah.
Um, because of as you noticed, as you said before, and currently they're having the multi-column. That was a big issue there for most people, that they want to have more than one column. But at least with the list view, I think you can get up, is it 3 or 4 rows or columns with
Yeah.
their tool, so you
Yeah.
can make it a little. It's kind of a bit of a cooler function, and especially for the end user experience, it's definitely better versus trying to get a single printout of a bunch of information all in one line. It's not the most helpful for most people.
Yeah. And also with the screen flows, I recently noticed that now previously flows were always in a user mode, like they always respected users record level and field level permissions. But now for some use cases, you might want to put a screen flow with maybe a single field or two fields and give permissions, like even if the user does not have a permission. So instead of going to profiles and giving the permissions on specific fields, just put a screen flow there, because now screen flows can also run in a system context, which was previously not the case. I think it was recently introduced in, I think, the last release or some just
But
after
yeah,
that.
I
Yeah.
think the last release.
Yeah, now we can decide to run the screen flow in a system context, and it has two options. Like it can have only the record level permissions of kind of all the record level permissions, or even record level plus field level. So we can have two different levels within that system context also. So I found it very cool recently. I just checked it out and it's quite good. And I think record triggered flows always run in like system context, but for auto launched and screen flows, we can decide in which context they should run. So it's quite advantage now.
Um, do you have do you have an example of a flow that you've written recently that did something that you think is kind of interesting or out of the norm?
Who is it directed towards?
Either one of you, Jake or Bible.
Yeah, I mean, I've taken recently some custom code that created some buildings. It does a bunch of queries and everything like that. And that custom code actually was breaking because of some design flaws in it, and that um, there was, as part of it, we were using a managed package. The managed package updated some things, and it caused that custom code to break. And rather than trying to get developers to work on something, because you don't always have developer access to everything. So I kind of went through the code and kind of rewrote it as a flow. And I was able to accommodate the new issue that the managed package was introducing with flow. And I'm actually able to do more things with it now. And as we're growing and we're introducing new types of it's for a billing and new types of billings, we can easily accommodate new types of things and add a new logic rather faster than trying to piecemeal into old code. We can just kind of add it into their new flow and go on. And it's easier to maintain because now we have more people that have that skill set of writing flows to be able to go ahead and modify that when needed versus just having a few developers that know how the code works. And it's a little bit easier for people to, especially with the visual side of it, seeing all the different components to see where they go. It's kind of easier to figure, okay, this is where I need to go. You don't spend as much time looking through code to find where you need to go. You can kind of easily tell where you are on the screen and go into that area and move there. So kind of a cool process. It was something that pretty much halted us in our tracks. We couldn't build for a little bit, and then I wrote the flow out, and then now we're able to do it again.
Okay, we've got a couple questions here, so we'll start with, see if Vibor wants to answer this one and let Jake chime in. When should you use Salesforce flows versus using Apex, in your opinion? Vibor.
So yeah, as I mentioned previously, like uh, flow is a great use case whenever, for example, screen flows I really like most because really replace our visual force and LWC to a great extent. The only thing I could not do in a flow, in a screen flow, is dynamic changes within a screen. For example, if we want to have some dependent values or dependent automation within the same screen, like if I change something, the other field should change automatically. So these kind of actions I find still not possible within a screen flow or within a flow in terms of comparing it with the visual force, Apex, or LWC. And in terms of record triggered flows, I would say, as I mentioned before, we do not still have the ability to decide or to know whether a particular field was changed, or if a particular record was created new or was updated. So these kind of things where we need the old values and we need to have knowledge about what happened before the flow was fired, still not there. So in these type of scenarios, I usually go for a Apex trigger or something written in an Apex class. So these are some of the examples. And also, sometimes we have a ability, like we have a requirement, we need to do some mass updates on bulk jobs. We need to write a batch in Apex. So still, flows cannot do that. Like we do not have such capabilities in flow. So in those kind of operations where need to do bulk data jobs, you'll always have to go towards Apex, I would believe. Even process builders and all, we cannot do that right now. So these are some of the examples. Maybe if Jake has anything he can add, but I think, yeah, these are the something areas which I don't see being done through flows effectively right now.
Yeah, I totally agree with the not being able to have dynamic changes on a single page. That's a big downfall of the flow. It happens. It's a request more than you would expect, and we tend to have to do that. We have to write a Lightning Web component or a Aurora component to handle those types of changes. Another thing that typically pops up is when you actually, if you're doing screen versus like Visual Force or Lightning LWCs there, is how flashy do they need to be? Because I mean, screen flows, they have their purpose. They're not heavily designed. It's like just a simple click through interface. If you need something to be a lot more interactive or flashy, you probably want to go with a Lightning Web component to do those types of things. When it comes to like trigger automation and things of that nature, typically I always first look to see if there's any existing processes on that object. So if I'm working on an account and there's already a trigger on the account, I'm probably not going to opt to go to a flow or anything like that. I'm going to try to keep the trigger going, unless I'm going to totally strip out that trigger and replace it. Typically, you want to keep just one kind of automation on your object. Otherwise, you're just going to lead to headaches further down the line. So if you already have existing Apex or code on your object, you probably want to stick with it. Otherwise, you can just be introducing issues down the line, and especially when it comes to testing, not just the code, but also your flow. You may run into weird things that are happening. It's just a good practice not to try to mix types of automations on your objects. Not saying anything net new. Maybe, yeah, net new, you could probably go with flow for a lot of your actions, but limit the amount of different automation tools you're using on a single object.
When I do consulting in Salesforce, and I'm coming into a org that's been hit by a few previous consultants, that's always an issue. You know, what's actually changing this data. Another question: can non-developers use Flow, or is custom code used often?
Can non-developers use flow?
Yeah, and I think what they're trying to get at is they're saying, if I use Flow, and we were talking about that custom Apex code that Flow's call, can I, if I'm a non-developer, can I get things done with flows without having to write custom code? I think is how I rephrase that question.
Yeah, I think for the most part, if you have a flow, you can get a lot of things done that triggers can do. It's when we have those weird corner cases where flow is not there yet. You probably have to go get custom parts for it. But like the unofficial SFDC, I believe it is, they have tons of things. They're written for plug and play, so you kind of have to read what the requirements are. They take the inputs and the parameters and they output things. Mm-hmm. So those are some really good tools that help non-developers get developer types of things done. But yeah, I don't think you don't have to be a developer in order to write a flow. I do think you have to have a mindset to where you can analyze what's going on, and you need to understand what's going on when you're doing a loop or when you're doing a summit, what's actually happening there, or when you do an update of a collection, what are you actually doing? And if you understand that, then you should be fine. But that's where I find most people struggle the most, is understanding the different components and what they actually mean and what they're actually doing within the flow.
Right. In other words, you have to understand Salesforce basic object concepts and things, no matter if you use flows or anything else. But you don't have to write actual Apex code to get stuff done with flows. You agree with that, Vibe, or do you have anything to add to that one?
Yes. So yeah, I agree with that. So basically, you need not be a developer, but it's like you have to think like a developer. So you need to be aware of all the best practices, and you need to be aware of how something that we are doing in a flow, because it's quite easy to now write a flow even with no technical background or no, I would say, development background. You can write some automation which can impact anything that is already written or can be written in future. So we always have to make sure that if you're writing any flow, you should take into consideration what it can impact and how it fits into your org's model, like what kind of architecture you already have, what kind of triggers or automations you already have in place, and how this will impact anything that may be coming in future. So try to make everything scalable and try to make as can say generic as possible wherever is there. So one good example is that I saw a very good presentation on making your flows also reusable, like instead of like as we do for code, we can make flows also reusable. So try to make them just modularizing them and make them compartmentalized so that you can fit a flow wherever there is a reusability component. So for example, we might have to throw errors in different flows, so that error might be sending the email to a particular user that anytime a flow is failing, you have to notify. So for that, you can build a simple flow and fit that flow wherever you want to do. So we should be just able to recognize what all is there in the system as a flow developer or as a flow builder who is working on flows. So yeah, as long as we know that, it's quite easy. And I think it's a tool which is designed for someone who actually is from admin and or is who does not want to write a code, because I think that's the whole purpose of that functionality, to remove click just to remove code and enhance clicks only. So yeah.
I think one thing that, like you say, you have to think like a developer, but one thing that I think flows bring to the table is that any admin can, if they know basically how flows work, can go and modify a flow, change it, versus maybe they don't feel comfortable writing one from scratch, especially if it's really complex. But certainly gives them the ability to, the user has a new, slightly changed requirement to go in there and do something, versus if it's an Apex code, you can't do, you can't touch it.
Yeah.
And one of the nice things with Flow is that it does have that versioning aspect to it. So if you're saving things up, if you go and start monkeying with the code there and you didn't save a previous version of it, you may be lost and not be able to fix your issue or get back to your starting point. Whereas at least with Flows, if you go down a path and you figure out that's not where you need to go, you can back out and go to your previous working version and then start all over again.
Yeah.
And
All
also
right. So go ahead, Bible.
sorry, I was saying also in terms of like in the code, the main challenge is also writing something called test classes and everything. Like you have to test using a particular, that also requires kind of development knowledge. But flows we can test using UI, and there's no such deployment process, some minimum coverage or something. So for admins and somebody with no technical background, it's also something that they can do without any developer support.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, I agree with you on that, but I do also think it's a good practice to write test classes for those types of things just to make sure that they are working as intended.
Yes, yes. Even like for flows, I think the Salesforce recommends that we can write test cases for flows as well, which most of
Yeah.
us don't do. But
Yeah,
yeah,
most people don't, but it's a good practice to do if you can.
Well, it doesn't make you do it, so you don't do it. Yeah, sorry, go ahead. Jake.
It's not enforced. Yeah, nobody does it.
Yeah, exactly. All right, we're getting close to the end here. If anybody has any more questions in the audience, throw them in the Q&A. Otherwise, uh, anything left, anything that you think we didn't cover today, Vibo or Jake, that you want to say about flows, possibly.
I'm just
yeah,
excited to see where they're going.
Yeah. Yeah, ditto. Okay, well, I think this was a good discussion. Covered a lot of topics about flows. I think the people in the audience listening to it will go away knowing more than when they came in here. I'd like to thank Vibor and Jake for being part of our team here, our X-Force Sessions team, that presenting team. And I want to remind everybody that the next session at the top of the hour is with David Masry, who's going to be talking about Salesforce, data modeling, databases, all kinds of Salesforce, all things Salesforce data. David wrote a book about it. He wrote the book on it. And I hope that if you're interested in data imports and data management in Salesforce, you'll attend. Again, thanks, Vibor, thanks, Jake, and thanks to everybody who attended.
thanks.